Southern Austria, 1904. Outside an idyllic lakeside cottage, the summer is ending. Inside, a young man, days away from returning to Vienna, writes this in his diary. I sit alone in my room. Before me, my favorite picture of Beethoven. Left and right of him, pictures of Mahler and Ibsen. So these are my surroundings. A small child of humanity among gods and heroes. It could have been written by so many of us young, idealistic classical loners. But that was actually 19-year-old Alban Berg in 1904, just months before he began studying with the formidable Arnold Schoenberg. Before he was a great composer, he was like us, a kid in his room, makeshift shrine in the corner, trying to stand among his heroes. Welcome back to the series. In our last video, we clapped through the rhythmic minefield of Stravinsky's Rite of Spring, a piece that challenged orchestras and audiences alike with a full frontal assault. Today, we're leaving the orchestra behind to explore one of the most astonishing Opus 1s ever written, Alban Berg's Piano Sonata. We're gonna see how a lonely, awkward teenager became a fierce modernist who somehow managed to stay connected to his sensual side in the midst of the most turbulent decade in music history, 1905 to 1914. And the key to this piece, the one thing you need to listen for, is that exact contradiction. It is a battle between two forces. On the one side, the discipline of his teacher, Arnold Schoenberg, music that is as rigorous and mathematical as a geometry problem. On the other, you have the sensuality of his idol, Gustav Mahler, music that is pure, overheated romantic drama. Everything about the man and everything about this sonata is a fight between the brain and the heart. And to understand how he pulled it off, you first have to understand the man. Berg was a paradox. On the outside, he was physically awkward. In a world of short men, his height was an embarrassment to him. He was also quite vain and conscious of his resemblance to the infamous poet and playwright Oscar Wilde, who you'll remember from the Salome episode. He was hardly a scintillating conversationalist. He preferred instead to listen and observe passively through his large, deep-set eyes. But internally, his world was a vortex of high drama and moral complexity. This was Vienna, after all. Berg was obsessed with the new sexual theories of Freud and his contemporaries, and he knew this world firsthand. He fathered an illegitimate child with a servant girl at 18. Wow. His sister was an outspoken lesbian. His mother-in-law was, for a time, the mistress of the Austrian Emperor Franz Joseph I, meaning Berg's wife, Helene, was the emperor's illegitimate daughter. That's juicy. And Berg loved being the confidant at the center of so many liaisons dangereuses.
Monsieur Danceny is one of those rare eccentrics who come here to listen to the music.
He was an avowed sensualist, but also a man of profound reserve. And it's this tension between a chaotic inner world and a reserved outer one that is baked into every note of his music. So when this quiet, complex young man creates his first major work, under whose guidance does he do it? Arnold Schoenberg. But to say that Schoenberg was just his teacher is a massive understatement. For 7 years, Schoenberg was Berg's master, his prophet, and a demanding father figure. And Berg, who up to that point was mostly self-taught, was a willing acolyte. But Schoenberg, who was only 10 years older, was brutally critical and made constant, huge demands. He had Berg running errands, paying utility bills, and helping him move house, all while creating piano reductions and analytical commentaries of Schoenberg's own work. Some called Berg his whipping boy. It was under this intense, almost suffocating mentorship that Berg presented his Opus 1 as a graduation piece in 1909. He was hesitant about it, having only written one movement when sonatas usually have 3 or 4. But Schoenberg's reply was legendary. Well then, perhaps you've said all there was to say. And he had. This single movement contains the DNA of Berg's entire mature style, what some have called Janus-faced, a style that looks backward and forward at the same time. And this duality has captivated musicians for over a century. Consider this. When you think of Glenn Gould, love him or hate him, who's the first composer that comes to mind? Probably Bach. But actually, Gould recorded and performed this sonata more than any other in his repertoire. And the more you think about it, the more it makes perfect sense. Gould loved to deconstruct music, often on the fly. He was an iconoclast drawn to music that was an intricate puzzle on the page, but an emotional vortex underneath. So let's put this duality to the test with an experiment. On the page, looking at the intervals, the angularity of it, this is a geometry problem. Schoenberg demanded mathematical efficiency and zero waste. But I want you to close your eyes and just listen. Be honest, if you heard this without knowing the year or the composer, would you guess it's a romantic piece or a modernist piece? Does it sound rigorous like math? Or is it pure, sensuous drama? You can hear that duality in the music itself, the sweeping romantic gestures of Mahler, disciplined by Schoenberg's intense intellectual rigor. And if you want to hear that Mahlerian heart turned up to 11, you absolutely must seek out the version for full orchestra by Dutch composer Theo Verbeek. It's a magnificent and authentic orchestration that proves this piece was practically a symphony in disguise. I've put a link in the description. But while the heart of the piece may have belonged to Mahler, its brain was pure Schoenberg. And that discipline wasn't just theoretical, it was forged daily through years of relentless demands. The complexity of their relationship would eventually soften into a deep friendship. Years later, after Berg's premature death, Schoenberg would look back and call him one of the dearest to me. But make no mistake, this sonata wasn't born in friendship. It was born in a friggin' crucible. And that's why this piece is so essential to the 1905 to 1914 decade. Strauss served his steak bloody and got paid. Stravinsky drove up the price of big drums. Berg used Schoenberg's discipline to harness his sensuality, and he created, at the very least, an aesthetic that is entirely unique. This should be extremely relatable music. It is to me very much. But it's led to a fascinating and somewhat tragic view of his legacy. Musicologist Leon Botstein wrote, "If Berg was an exception, it was because he was not the starting point of the future, but an idiosyncratic appendage on a glorious past that ended with Mahler." An appendage. A glorious dead end. And it's hard to argue with, but that's exactly why we love him. He couldn't write a blueprint for the future, he could only try to lash together two worlds that tectonic forces were pulling apart. When this piece finally comes home to B minor, it's not just a harmonic resolution. It's that 19-year-old boy from the start of the video, closing his diary, still sitting among his gods. In the comments of the Salome video, you guys made a choice. I asked what you wanted, and the people's choice was clear. You chose the scarier sister. We're going from the polite, repressed anxiety of Berg back to the screaming, bloody hysteria of Strauss. Bring a helmet, because this opera is harder core than the Real Housewives of New Jersey.
Oh my God! Cut it out! Cut it out!
So, next time, we're going to the absolute edge of sanity, to the darkest corners of the human psyche, with Richard Strauss's Elektra. If you're ready for that, hit that like button, subscribe, damn it, and click the little bell thingy so you don't miss it. See you next time.